I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we are meeting. Tonight, is sport having its own Me Too moment? The Voice campaign heats up as Peter Dutton warns people will be bullied into voting yes. And do politicians ever think long-term? Joining our panel, editor at Mamamia, Jessie Stevens. She's just published her debut novel, Something Bad Is Going to Happen. Labor member for Robertson, Gordon Reid, an emergency department doctor who co-chairs the Parliamentary Friends of the Uluru Statement. Olympian and doctor Jana Pittman. She's competed at both the summer and the winter games, and her latest book is about accepting herself. Liberal member for Casey, Aaron Violi, a former sales executive in the food industry whose family has lived in Casey for 3 generations, and Chief Executive of the Grattan Institute, Danielle Wood. She's on a new government task force into corporate competition. Later in the program, looking for the Loch Ness Monster is one thing, but if we find it, what do we do? Welcome to Q&A.
Hello, I'm Patricia Carvelis. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Hercules Chu.
The Spanish football boss refuses to resign after kissing a female player on the lips. How should we deter sexual harassment towards athletes in the future, such as by implementing new laws and regulations and enacting suitable prosecution?
Jana.
I thought you might throw to me because of being a sports person in the past.
Are an actual athlete.
I am, and I have been kissed inappropriately by a coach, not mine, an international coach, where it was a cultural norm in that setting, and I didn't really think anything of it until I witnessed this on television. So I think, as also a women's doctor now, we have to speak up for that. Consent is very important for our women to feel safe in those different environments, and if we don't stand up for it in a public setting, then it's really a misdemeanour for the women globally. But I think the hardest and saddest thing that's come out of this is how much is overshadowing what this incredible World Cup means for women in sport internationally and in this country. And I think we really need to get back and focus on how amazing the fact that we knocked off so many men's vests in terms of sales, and the fact that this is one of the most highly watched events since Cathy Freeman's win. So I think we really need to go back to that, and let's squash the media in this space so that we can really celebrate what the World Cup means for women.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point you make about moving on, but I suppose it's not resolved yet. He's actually the head of Spanish soccer, has been suspended for 90 days. Yeah. It's not finished, is it?
It's not finished at all. And, I mean, you're exactly right. This is something that so many women face, and this happened on the world stage. It's literally, there's a video of it, there are photos of it, and we're still being told it didn't happen. It's something that I think a lot of women can relate with. And Craig Foster has said some really interesting stuff today about how this speaks to how we need more women at higher levels, because the fact it's been sort of overlooked and, you know, they're kind of trying to dismiss it at some levels, suggests that there aren't enough women, which is something that we can all learn from, I think. And also, I think, you know, women are speaking out all over the world about this. There are a lot of male soccer players, some of the best paid in the world, who are still silent. And until they've got a lot of power. And I think that hopefully in the coming days we see them advocate for their female counterparts.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. A lot of the women have spoken out, but you're right, we've seen fewer men. Danielle, that point that Jessie just made is such a good one, that it's actually on video. It's on... We got to see it. It wasn't a sort of private moment. It was publicly on the stage, on the world stage, and yet there's still a discussion about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you sort of see him lurch kind of into her, you see the reaction. So it feels a bit like gaslighting, really, to say she was consenting when she, you know, you can see the video, she's clearly said that she didn't consent. I mean, I'm a little bit heartened by the fact we have seen so many. I mean, she came out right away. We saw all her teammates come out. A few of the men have come out. I mean, I think that's quite different to the conversation we might have been having a decade ago if this happens. So we are making progress, albeit slower than any of us would like.
Jana, I want to go back to what you told us, which was kind of shocked me, but perhaps I shouldn't be shocked. You said it's actually even happened to you.
But it was, as I was saying, it was a particular coach where culturally it was a norm. So it wasn't just me, but it wasn't really accepted as bad at that time. So I didn't even reflect on it at the moment. I knew him quite well. He was a very friendly coach. He was a phenomenal coach, a phenomenal person. So I didn't take it personally because in that context, it wasn't meant in a way that was just like discriminatory against me. So I guess when I looked at that situation, I was trying to play devil's advocate in that space, in that he would have been so elated and so excited. Does not excuse the behaviour, but so in that moment that perhaps he expressed himself in a way that's completely inappropriate. What I find wrong is that he's now not resigning as a result of it. So I feel like if he had been even slightly apologetic for those reactions, we would all be feeling very differently about the way he's behaved. So
yeah, the outcome is that it's, as you say, regardless of what he thought he was doing, it's so undermining and so mortifying for the person, and it's been such a distraction. And it's a way of exerting power. It's like, you might be one of the best female footballers in the world, but I'm more powerful than you. Like, that's what it feels like it said, and that's why I agree, though, that it's heartening that even in Spain it's been called sort of Spain's Me Too movement.
They won the World Cup, Aaron. It's unbelievable.
I was shocked when I saw it, and I agree. Like, has to resign. The fact that he hasn't is very disappointing. And Jesse's point is true, and it's something that, as a man, I'm very conscious of. It's not just women that should be speaking out about these issues and this behaviour. And if he's prepared to do that on national or global television on that stage, you know, that is deeply concerning as well. And Jana's point about it overshadowing the World Cup is disappointing. We can't let it move on. We need to keep the conversation going, but then we need to come back as a country, I believe, to what an amazing event the World Cup was. And I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and she cheered those Matildas on like I've not seen. And
mine too.
And I had a moment of thinking, for her and for all young girls out there, like, how amazing that she doesn't know a world other than elite sport. And she just knows female elite athletes. That's her world, and that's heartening. So we need to continue that conversation, but not let this behaviour off the hook.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with all the panellists, and thank you for raising this question as well. I think consent was robbed from that sports person, from that soccer player. It was an absolutely amazing game. I was a bit unhappy not to see the Matildas there, but go Matildas. You've done us all very, very proud, and we're so proud of what you've accomplished for Australia and for the community. But at the end of the day, this was the wrong thing. It needs to be called out, and it needs to stay in the national conversation.
Well, he can't stay in his job, can he?
Well, this type of behaviour is wrong. And no, I agree with Aaron that the 90-day step down with FIFA is a good start, but it's not far enough. I think he should step down.
Yeah. Now, here's a video question from Helen Taylor.
How can anyone resent the notion of an Indigenous voice to Parliament when we look at the huge influence on government that lobbyists from industries such as energy, mining and resources, banking and finance, gambling and hospitality, real estate, and the big pharmaceutical companies already have?
Good.
So, look, I do think we need to separate that and talk about the voice first. The voice is about listening, and it's about making sure that we recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of this country, because it is the right thing to do.
But Helen's question was about the contrast with who gets access and voices in the Parliament.
So, look, I think it's important that the voice is going to provide that independent advice both to government and to the executive government. It's going to be independent of government and be made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people acting on the issues and policies that will affect them at the end of the day. I suppose with regards to lobby groups and firms, as the questioner was saying, those groups also do represent their members. And they do provide some advocacy for their members. But what the voice is about is that it's there to give advice to government. This is what's good, this is what's bad. Now it's up to government to listen, because we know that when we have a top-down, Canberra-based approach, we don't get better outcomes. Consultation is so key, and making sure that we're listening to to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And on that note, just the power of listening. There will be some medical professionals in the crowd, I know. Jana knows this as well, that the most powerful aspect of being a health professional is the patient history. It's actually listening to the patient, because more often than not, before you do any blood tests or before you do any scan, CT, X-ray, you can actually formulate what's called a provisional diagnosis. You can find out what's wrong with the patient and start to instigate that treatment and that treatment plan, which can ultimately reduce harm, but also to decrease the likelihood of morbidity and mortality. And that's the power of listening to one person at one moment in time in a hospital bed. Imagine what we can do on a bigger scale if we recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and listen to them about the issues and the policies that affect us.
I want to go to Helen's substantial question, though, because it's about the contrast of who gets a voice in the parliament. And she talks about lobbyists and what she considers to be a disproportionate level of power that they have. Danielle, we've spoken on my radio show about your own report into that power and lobbying. What do you make of the point she's trying to make and ask a question about?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting parallel that she's drawing. And so Gordon is right. Consultation matters. Getting in front of decision makers and being able to put your point of view matters. And when we look at the moment around who gets that access, we ran the numbers looking at ministerial diaries in Queensland and New South Wales, where they actually publish them and you can see who ministers meet with. It is disproportionately well-resourced groups, businesses and unions. Helen, I think, mentioned mining and resources, property, gambling. We found all of those got a disproportionate share of face time compared to their role in the broader economy. So I think it is an interesting parallel. Given consultation matters, the idea of creating a body that is there to advise government, made up of First Nations people, consulting on First Nations issues. I mean, I think it can only be a good thing and a balancing of that public debate.
Aaron, the Prime Minister's announcing the date on Wednesday, the worst kept secret in Canberra, unless he wants to surprise us all. But we think it's October the 14th. Yes. You've supported the no case.
Yep.
You've just heard the point Helen makes in the question and the point Danielle makes on the numbers about who gets access to government. Does that sound fair to you?
Well, I would make the point on Helen's question that Indigenous Australians have access, and I'll address the voice as well, but the Coalition of the Peaks exists. So there's mechanisms at the moment where Indigenous Australians can make representations and do make representations to government. And if they didn't, as an example, well, what has been happening for the last 16 months with the Albanese government? So there are organisations and mechanisms in place. And the question, to Gordon's point, is how do we look to improve that system to make sure that we have better mechanisms so Indigenous voices can be heard? So I support the coalition position. I support constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians. One of my concerns, and the reason I support the legislated voices, is that I'm passionate about local, regional and a national voice. And the reason local voices are so important, in my community in Casey, we've got a wonderful Indigenous community. The Wurundjeri people. Corrandirk was an establishment in Victoria. I've been blessed to grow up in that area. I've got many friends that are Indigenous, and it's shaped my experience. And the reality is that the challenges that the community in Hillsville face are different to the challenges that Gordon's Indigenous community face. The Indigenous community in far north Queensland or Arnhem Land or Western Australia face vastly different challenges. And that's why a local voice is so important.
Sure, but that could still... A constitutional body could be created and then you, the parliamentarian, designs that local voice, right?
Correct. But I don't believe we should be changing the Constitution on a hope.
But if you think that the voice is a good idea, which you've just articulated, why not in the Constitution?
Because if we legislate, it's a safer model, it takes away all risk, and it means...
Is the safety that you can remove it?
No, the safety is you can adjust the mechanism.
But you can change the legislation even if it's in the Constitution.
But the other risk is that the High Court will make decisions, and we don't know. There has been many... There is a level of risk. How high that is, we don't know. How wide that is, we don't know. There always has to be... There is some risk because ultimately the High Court will make the decision. Many legal experts have come out and said there is minimal risk, but so we don't know how a High Court will interpret cases. That's the reality of the High Court.
That how things are at the moment in Australia and the setup is not working?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think that it's about as well the message that a no vote would send to Indigenous Australians.
So can I share one story on Indigenous Australians? As I said, I've engaged deeply with my community, with my Indigenous community, and 24 hours before I had to give my speech in Parliament on The Voice, I spoke to an Indigenous leader in my community who is a wonderful person that I've known for many years, and he said to me, please don't support this voice. I do not, as a leader in my community, support this voice, and many others don't. And when I asked him why, because that shocked me, he said to me, my community has not been consulted at any stage through this process, and if our voice has not been heard during the consultation stage, how will we be heard with a voice? And then I said and this was the other part, I said to him, can I share your story? And he said, yes, you can. I said, can I share your name? And he said, no, because the repercussions for me will be significant.
But it's not either or, is it? Like, can't it be both?
And that's what I'm saying. If you have the one of my objections is that so people say it will close the gap. We don't know whether it will close the gap because we don't have the information on how the Wurundjeri community, how their voice will be heard, how that will ladder to a regional voice, how that will ladder to a national voice.
We don't know anything about your legislated voice either, by that token.
And doing nothing won't.
But that's what I'm.
Sorry, could I just jump in there?
Yeah.
You've been, I think you're generalising and lumping all Aboriginal people into the one group.
I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that
we're not a homogenous group. We will
agree.
have different ideas, different political ideology and different ways we think this could progress. But I think the important thing to remember is the Voice is about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and that was the result of significant regional dialogues right across the country, culminating in that Constitutional Convention in 2017, which led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a gracious, powerful document that has called for constitutional recognition through a voice.
No, I agree with you. I'm saying the same thing in terms of it's not one Indigenous voice and there's not one homogenous Indigenous voice. And the Uluru Statement of the Heart, I researched, I spoke to the Minister, Linda Burney. Not one Wurundjeri person was involved in the Uluru Statement of the Heart or the referendum working group
I want to bring in a few others, if I can,
either.
into the conversation too. Yana, I know you've been watching...
I'm out of this one.
You're out.
No, in all truth, I actually found it, when we always say as medical professionals, we speak to people at a Year 8 level, I have found this incredibly confusing. So I were in the courtroom. We were in the green room beforehand and Gordon was explaining very beautifully what the Constitution is. But I'm like, if I am doing my PhD and if I don't understand the entire concepts behind the yes and the no, how on earth am I going to vote correctly to make sure my people are safe? All people, Aboriginal people and every culture that beautifully diversifies Australia. So I don't know what to do in this situation if I'm struggling with this decision.
So you're undecided?
Well, I think I'm a very strong yes, but then now I'm hearing that it's not what I thought it was. So it's a confusing message, and I feel like I am well read and well versed in this space, and even more so after the conversation with Gordon previously. But I just feel a little bit like it's really hard to make these decisions on behalf of people that I don't, that I am not speaking for.
OK. Today, Peter Dutton said that people would be bullied into voting yes. Do you think that's what's going on?
Well, I mean, if I use the example of the Indigenous elder that I spoke to, he was not comfortable for his view to be shared publicly because of repercussions. I think
but are people being bullied?
Well, bullying there is certainly a societal pressure and expectation.
But why is the polling showing that no is trending positively if there's such bullying for the yes case?
Well, I'm not saying no one can be forced to vote yes or no, because when you're in the privacy of the polling booth...
Just you and your pencil.
Yeah, you can do exactly right. But there is certainly, a discussion in the media, sporting corporations, these kind of things. It's a conversation that I've had many people, Patricia, say to me, I'm voting no, but I'm not telling people because I don't feel comfortable. So I'm not saying people are being bullied, but there is certainly an emotive conversation that is part of what's happening. And yeah.
And last question to you. The opposition leader has also really been questioning, whether there's ticks and there's strikes, and the AEC has come out pretty strongly. Do you support the institution of the AEC and its independence?
I support the institution of the AEC and its independence.
Should it be defended?
We should always defend the AEC. We're very fortunate in this country to have a strong, independent electoral commission, and they're going through a redistribution at the moment, and you compare that to a lot of other countries, and that will be a completely independent process that will make sure that the notion of one vote is upheld. But I would say there is a question of perceptions. Most people would say that a tick means yes and a cross means no.
But it's never been the way that the AEC has conducted anything, right?
Can we not improve things, PK?
But what did you think of it when the machinery bill was going through?
I would say, because in the legislation, it doesn't reference ticks or crosses. It references yes and no, and then it references savings provisions, which allows the AEC to make a determination.
Okay.
They've made but that's important because there's a perception that the legislation outlined yes and no, ticks and crosses. It doesn't do that. It gives the AEC a mechanism for a savings provision. And what I would say is I absolutely believe the independence of the AEC is important. Democracy is too valuable to be risked. The result of the referendum is also crucial. And if there is any perception of impropriety...
Aren't you creating the perception?
So why wouldn't we just create a mechanism to remove the perception?
I want to commend the No campaign on making this so much more complicated than it needs to be. They are remarkable. I feel like it's this really modest, incredibly simple proposal that's being put forward about constitutional recognition, which has been supported by multiple governments. And it's so clear. And then the No campaign has just come in and it's like... now I don't even know whether to tick it or not.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to vote
You're
wrong.
actually meant to write yes or no, and that's what you're meant to do.
Right, yes or no.
That's the rule.
This is a perfect example, right? This is a tiny fraction of people that are going to tick or cross. We know people will understand to write yes or no.
Correct.
And by elevating it to the level it is, it does look like it's calling into question the AEC. It does look like we're attacking institutions.
But it's not post-referendum, it's pre. We've got an opportunity now to adjust
but this is a tiny fraction of votes. I mean, why couldn't we have done this in a more silent way? It just looks like it's trying to sow these seeds of confusion, and that's what concerns me.
All right, we're going to hear from our next questioner because this show's about the people. Next, hear from David Riling, who has a question.
Yes, so this question is to Dr. Gordon Reid and Mr. Violi. Declining homeownership data shows we are becoming a society where younger generations without inherited wealth will soon be locked out of the housing market. So soon retirees who own homes will need these same younger people to fund their health care, pension, and aged care services through ever-increasing taxes. This hardly seems fair. What specific ideas do you have to avoid this breakdown of the generational contract?
I think I'll start with Danielle Wood.
Fantastic question. Thank you for it. And we obviously had the intergenerational report come out last week, which was pointing to some of the very issues that you are raising. This has been a slow-burning issue. Home ownership rates, as you say, amongst young people have been dropping like a stone for a long time. Ageing population will push tax burdens higher for working Australians in decades to come. So we need to tackle each of those issues head on. So on home ownership, supply is absolutely critical. The reason we have seen this huge divergence between incomes and house prices over the past 2 decades is we haven't built enough supply. So I'm very supportive of the decision of the National Cabinet last week to try and incentivise states to build more houses in areas where people want to live, close to jobs and amenities. That will be critical. On the question of tax, we have made this generational transfer much harder by the fact that we have basically said that people will opt out of the income tax system when they hit 65. So only about 12% of people over 70 pay any income tax. And because we have these increasing costs associated with aged care, with health, that is meaning that we are pushing this burden onto younger Australians. So we do need to look at the tax lever I think we do need to think about taxation in retirement, because I think that's the only way you're going to address the heart of this problem, which is a big transfer effectively from one generation to another.
Gordon.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question, David. We know that housing is a huge issue right across the country, in particular the regions in my area of the Central Coast here in New South Wales. And that's why we've put together a suite of policies with regards to housing to really try and tackle that issue. Many here in the audience tonight and many watching on tonight will have heard of the Housing Australia Future Fund, which is a future fund in order to construct tens of thousands of social and affordable homes for those frontline workers, but also to family and children fleeing domestic violence, veterans who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, First Nations people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. But currently that's being stalled by our friends in the opposition and the Greens as well. But that's just one aspect of housing. There's the Social Housing Accelerator Fund that was recently announced, that $2 billion housing fund that will go to the states, roughly $500 million to New South Wales, for new social housing builds. There's recently we had our...
Can I draw you to the question about the generational contract and whether it's broken down? I understand you're doing lots of things on housing, but so clearly we have a really, really significant issue. If you look at the intergenerational report, looking forward, young people are going to have to prop up old people unless there's a fundamental change to the tax mix. Do you think it needs to happen?
Look, what we recognise is that we need more houses to put people in. Help to Buy, all of those schemes, the regional first home buyer grant as well. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has been pretty clear on his stance on taxation and taxation changes at the moment. We are making modest changes to the taxation system, whether that be through the petroleum rent resources tax, whether that be through making multinationals pay their fair share of tax in this country. I think that's really important. And also to changes to superannuation balances over the $3 million. These aren't small changes, but they are changes that we are starting to make in the tax system, and the Treasurer has been pretty clear of that. But I think and to the intergenerational report itself, what it shows is we have some significant challenges that are coming up in the future, and we do need to be planning for those challenges. Because if we only look 10 minutes ahead or look 10 seconds ahead, which has happened under previous governments, then we're going to be walking backwards into the future and we're going to trip over. So it's making sure we're investing in housing, we're investing in clean, renewable energy, making sure we're diversifying our energy mix, it's investing in housing, and also too, which is important, which hasn't been done for quite some time, is investing in people. Skills and training to get Australian people into Australian jobs in Australian industry, in particular the care economy, which was a focus of the intergenerational report. You know, getting people into those fee-free TAFE positions and Commonwealth-supported uni positions for areas of need and national priority. So investing in people, investing in industry and productivity, investing in housing and investing in Australia is the way that we can address this challenge.
Yana, do you worry about your kids 100%. Ever buying houses?
Of course I do.
Written that off?
I mean, if they have to look after my finances in the future, it's going to be a problem. At least there's 6 of them, so they can all contribute to the various... No, but I asked the question of you say that we need to increase the amount of housing within our systems, right? But I went out I did an amazing talk out at Camden this week to their community, and they have no access to railways out there. So they're pushing all these young families out there. There's no access to jobs. They're travelling an hour to get to work every day. There's no transport into the city for them to do so. So we keep pushing these people rurally, but they have to work in the cities. I just don't know how come we can't move our whole systems and our hospitals, everything further rural to set up sort of smaller cities in a more regional setting? Because we're also crying out for, you know that, as a doctor yourself, crying out for that regional and remote access to resources.
So we have that issue on the Central Coast here. So
incentivise them though. And isn't there not a way that we can push families to feel we can?
But they have to be economies of scale, right? You have to be able to actually.
The whole thing's got to go. As a place, move as one whole system.
Yeah, so that's investing in things like transport, making sure, and that's just to put in perspective the National Reconstruction Fund. So making sure that we're building things in Australia again, including things like trains and buses and ferries and the like. So investing in that transport, but also to being able to live, work and play
in the same.
where you live.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a big
Okay.
thing that I'm after on the Central Coast, and making sure we're
Let
investing
me
in
bring
local
Jessie in if I
infrastructure.
can. You're next to me, Jessie, and I'm missing you.
I don't know a lot about tax, but yes, continue.
I suspect you know a little bit about housing, and this is actually, you know, do we have water coolers? Do people still have water coolers? It is the biggest conversation people
Yeah.
have at the moment.
Yeah.
And God, young people are angry. They are so
Really
grumpy.
angry. And then, so you can't afford a house, so then you need to rent. And the rental prices are so beyond astronomical because you're paying for someone's mortgage, and someone who perhaps has multiple properties, and you know you'll never get in, and you also don't have any security. So you can be kicked out at any moment. I've got mates who are having their first, second children and are in places where they don't know, how do you do a catchment area? How do you work out where you're going to send them to school if you don't know where you're going to live? And these rental increases are just suffocating, and they're not indexed on how much more we're earning. So there is an enormous amount of resentment, I think. I think the thing that makes the most sense to me is reading a bit about vacancy tax and sort of looking at houses that the fact we have potentially 1 million houses that are empty, and then we have a whole lot of people who can't find housing, just seems the maths isn't mathing for me. So,
Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important question. It is topical. I mean, I've got sort of, I guess, a first principles belief on housing that every Australian that wants to own a home should own a home, and it's got lots of implications. Jesse's right, the security, it's one of our most basic needs. If you don't feel secure, you're not going to feel part of a community, and we see volunteer numbers are down, and because people aren't setting up roots in their communities. So there is significant challenges in terms of housing that we need to address. It's complicated because there is local, state and federal governments involved, and it links to the intergenerational question that you spoke about. And something I called for in my first speech was a systematic and comprehensive review of both the tax system and federation, and not ruling anything in and out. For too often, we've done tax reviews and we've said, well, we're going to look at this, but we're not going to look at something else.
That's at
like
odds
the
with what
GST.
your political party's saying, though.
And we need to have those conversations.
Do you think your leadership should also embrace everything being on the table? Because at the moment, Liberal frontbenchers, when I speak to them, say, no, we can't do that, no increases, no... But there has to be a wholesale look, doesn't
So
there?
there needs to be a white paper that looks at federation, and I know it's a bit of a boring topic, but it's
Spice it
crucial.
up for us.
Well, because what we need to, and this is part of the challenge that we raise, that we need to have a comprehensive discussion with experts, looking at these things with no political lens, and then suddenly it becomes rule in, rule out. What does your leadership think? There are short-term political questions for the day, but we can't be talking about the GST in isolation or capital gains tax
It should
or
all be
any
on the
taxes. We need to look at holistically and understand that there's a trade-off. So if we increase the GST, that's a regressive tax and there is implications, but can you reduce payroll tax? Can you reduce stamp duty, which is a tax on housing? The first thing, we talk a lot about the amazing financial deregulation of the 1980s. What's not often talked about is that there was a review by the Fraser government that looked at the financial system and asked all those questions and came up with some answers. And then the Fraser government and the Hawke government implemented many of those findings. And I'm saying we need to have those conversations because young people can't get into housing. Older people have worked really hard, and it's important we also, when we talk about older people, understand that many have savings, but there are many that don't. And I do also think, and I have people that come and speak to me in my community that get a little bit frustrated about this intergenerational war, particularly older females that have left a relationship, don't have financial security. So we've got to be really careful in the conversation. And I think we just need to be prepared to have a look at everything. I called for it in my first speech. I'll continue to call for it. I'll continue to talk to colleagues about it.
And tell your colleagues not to make it this political war all the time.
Well, I think we all, between the media, between politicians, we need to look at everything and understand the pros.
You're calling
and
for a
cons.
moratorium on the tax wars, aren't you?
I think we need to. The intergenerational report, it is never accurate to the number, but it showed, you look at the deficits that are forecast for the next 40 years, that's not sustainable. So we need to find solutions, but we need to make sure that everyone in the country is sharing the load, not being punished. These are big challenges we have. And if we're not prepared to have a national conversation now, when are we going to have that conversation?
Well, we're probably going to make our kids and grandkids do it at this stage. Plenty to get to tonight. Here's a video question from Celia Anderson-Cook.
I am a mum of 1.5-year-old fraternal triplets, and I gave birth to them at 35 weeks, and I had to stop work at about 29 weeks. And after they were born, they spent about 3 weeks in the hospital before they came home. What that meant is I used a significant chunk of my parental leave before the babies were even able to come home. My question to the panel is, should the Australian government, and we know that they're already looking into parental leave at the moment, looking to reform it, should the Australian government consider increasing parental leave for parents of multiples?
Well, you know, I'm going
Celia.
to
What do you reckon, Yana?
I think that's a yes. I've obviously have 6 children myself, and the first 4 were a completely different kettle of fish from when the twins came home. So I have 18-month-old twins, and it's hard. It's really hard, especially when your partner goes back to work and you've got all these little kids at home. So I can't even imagine how she would have done it with triplets. And I have a colleague who's got quadruplets, and just trying to manage. She goes through like 120 bottles in a day. Like just the sheer volume of having to look after those small humans is excessive. And so if you're trying to go back to work, can you imagine even the childcare payments for those 4 children or 3 children or 2 children? So I think in that aspect, most families don't plan on twins or multiples. And so a little bit of extra support from paid parental leave would be amazing. And I know they're already obviously trying to split the rebate to be able to have paternity and maternity leave, but having them in conjunction and not split, in other words, 40, I think it should be per child, if I'm being really honest.
Per child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a twin, and my mother had us, and then 2.5 years later decided that she wanted 1 more.
Oh no, you got twins again.
And so 2 sets of twins.
Yeah,
so she should still be on maternity leave.
I agree.
But I look at that, and I mean, I've got an 8-week-old at home.
It's hard.
It's really hard
Yeah.
with 1.
Yeah.
And it's not even considered multiples unless it's 3, which I read recently, and I was like, but that's not right.
That's a trick.
Higher order multiples.
That's a trick.
Someone should change that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I read that twins don't cost double as much.
Oh,
they
yes,
cost
they do.
something like 5
Yes,
times as much.
exactly.
Which I couldn't work out. But when you consider, so obviously you've got nappies, you've got bottles, you've only got 2 hands, but I don't, then you look at cars, then you look at prams, you look at everything you need to do. You're also more likely to have a high-risk pregnancy, to spend more time in hospital, to go early. And then you've got these fathers as well who took their leave and their children aren't even out of hospital yet. And so to me that doesn't make sense, and it's about 4,000 Australian families a year, I think. It's not an enormous amount of people. So when you consider the money and the support, it seems like it's something that's totally reasonable and perhaps a loophole that just hasn't been
I agree. It's just been missed slightly.
Yeah.
Danielle?
Look, I fully agree with all of that.
But just to give some context, Danielle, you were on the Women's Task Force on Economic.
And we were looking at the
what you
design
did.
of parental leave, and I wish I had that question in the lead up to that, because, look, I entirely agree. If we think, what's parental leave there for? It's for women to recover from birth, and then it's for new parents to bond with their baby, develop those routines, work out how to look after these small humans. And when you've got 2 or 3 or 4, the recovery takes longer. She said you might be in hospital for an extended period. You just need that extra time. It's not going to be a big impost in terms of cost. It's pretty clearly easy to define. So, look, I think there's a really strong case for it.
Okay. So the 3 women on the panel say it's a great idea. None of the 3 women on the panel are in the parliament. The 2 men on the panel, just as it turns out, are in the parliament and therefore have some influence, you'd hope. Are you going to do it? Are you going to advocate for it?
So what I'd say first is thank you for your question, Celia, and thank you for showing off your three beautiful children, your three gorgeous children.
That you should be doing a better job of funding.
They're little advocates at the moment. But no, look, paid parental leave was one of the big items of discussion and topics of discussion through the federal election, and it continues to be one because we know that supporting parents in that perinatal setting is really important, making sure that people have access to the things they need when they need it. And that's part of the government's plan at the moment to extend and expand paid parental leave.
To the question, because we've got to move on to our next question, is that something you would support? Multiple
So
births?
I think at the moment we're expanding that paid parental leave, and we have to start somewhere, and that's where the government has decided to start at this point.
I know you're not the minister, but do you think it's a good idea? That's the question.
Look, like I said, we are expanding parental leave.
Just personally, though.
I think he does.
Yeah, I agree.
I just think he can tell us.
No, look, I think it's part of the broader suite. We're looking at expanding paid parental leave. But look, there are other things surrounding paid parental leave that we would do if we were in a better financial situation, if our economic situation was. If our fiscal situation wasn't an improved.
Aaron, really quick.
Yeah, no, I think it's and Jesse's point, 4,000 families, the impact it would have on those families, and the reality that if you have it first, like it's not like it is an extra child, but instead of having your first and 2 years later you have another one, you have two twins, the 4-year budgetary impact is neutral in that perspective. So I think when you allow that with 4,000 people, it sounds like it's something that, unless you've got twins, you don't really think about it. It makes a lot of sense.
So you'll talk to Peter Dutton about it?
I'll have a chat to Peter about it. No problem. I'll speak to Anne Rushton, the minister. I'll write to Mark Butler, the health minister, about this issue as well. I'll speak to all three of them.
Now that was a hard labour. Boom, boom, sorry. I know that you think superannuation should be split between couples because women often have the short end of the deal, don't they, because they're raising children?
And there's a few of my friends who have actually looked at it and worked out that their partner can have their super contributions and share it between the two of them if they're off, which I think is quite a good idea because, I mean, but what's good about the policy that's come in is that it is encouraging men and women, if you're in a hetero relationship, to split it, which means that the superannuation is also split and you don't have women who are getting to the end of their careers having been part-time and, taken time out of the workforce, over and over again, really disadvantaged. So hopefully that will mean that it's more of an even gender split.
And this gets us to the topic of our online poll. We're asking you, should women be paid superannuation as part of the government's paid parental leave scheme? You can cast your votes anonymously on the Q&A Facebook, Twitter and YouTube accounts or the ABC News Instagram account, and we'll bring you the results a little later in the show. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A live with Jessie Stevens, Gordon Reid, Jana Pittman, Aaron Violi and Danielle Wood. I'd like to bring in Kira McNeil now.
Hi, as a local emergency department doctor and worker at the front lines of the pandemic, I'm sure that Dr. Gordon Reid and, of course, Dr. Jana have seen the negative impacts of GP shortages, nursing shortages, and overall the neglect of the healthcare system in Australia. Through policy, funding and legislation, how do you think that we should approach this problem moving onwards?
I might start if that's okay. Thank you, Kira, so much for your question. And we know that GP shortages and healthcare staff shortages have really contributed to the pressure that our state hospitals are under. So I continue to practice in the emergency department and see the result of that. And one of we look at the amount of medical students that are currently selecting general practice, which is around that 10 to 12% mark, I believe. So it's at historic lows. And I think we really need to ascertain as to why that is the case. I do think that remuneration is part of that conversation. GPs, on average, are paid less than other medical specialties. And part of that is looking at the structure of how GPs are paid, including bulk billing. So in the recent budget, we found that what we needed to do is we tripled the bulk billing incentive so that people can access the healthcare when they need it, and the partial re-indexation of bulk billing. So that will help contribute to that. And then too, there's how do you retain how do you retain those GPs once they're already in the training program? How do you retain them in the area that they're in rather than going back to sort of where they came from? So if you grew up in the centre of Sydney and then you go and be a GP registrar for a little while on the Central Coast or Newcastle, but you want to go home, how do we keep them in our regions or even further afield? So we look at some of the incentive payments that there are to keep GPs in those more rural and remote areas. So the way that that's classified is the modified Monash scale, so the 4 to 7, so keeping them in those areas. And then to also working with medical students and universities about the benefits of working in general practice or rural generalism as well. So whether that be through the RACGP or whether that be through ACRM, which is the College of Rural and Remote Medicine. So making sure that medical students are really exposed to that breadth of what generalism is, because general practice is one of the most difficult specialties that you can undertake as a doctor. You have an undifferentiated patient, meaning you have no idea what is wrong with the patient in front of you, and then you have to figure out what's going on, and then you either treat that on the spot, you refer on, or they're going to need some acute care at that point. So you're not only making the clinical decisions in the moment, but you're also thinking, well, how else do I better treat this patient? And that's one of the hardest things that we do in healthcare with those undifferentiated patients. So I think it's a conversation about remuneration. It's a conversation about the training and education of medical students and general practitioners as registrars. And really it's working with the peak bodies that represent generalists. So the Royal College of General Practitioners and the College of Rural and Remote Medicine.
Jana?
I think you've highlighted it perfectly. The main issues that are associated. Obviously, you and I have come out of medical school at different times, but I look at majority of my friends who don't want to go into general practice because they're being pushed remotely as the only options for them to train. So one of my closest friends got a rejection letter from RACGP last week. She is one of the most competent doctors I've ever met, but because she has 3 children in schools right now, she cannot move out of her local metro area, and the only option she had was to go remotely. However, if they offered her a big financial remuneration to, you know what I'm trying to say, a package of money.
A large package of money.
If they gave a reason or an incentive for the doctors perhaps who don't have family to go remotely, or as part of their contract encourage them to go and train in a rural and remote region, perhaps some of the families that have to stay or the more localised people would. I think one of the biggest problems though is that, as you said, from I can't say that word, remuneration.
When you look at the money.
When you look at the money, if you go to a GP and they get paid maybe $25 for that consult, but you go and have a massage and it's $80 and people don't seem to have a problem for paying that. We need to change that conversation with our community, that a GP is worth the value in actually seeing them, because so many of my other friends that are GP trainees or GP skilled consultants already are struggling to pay the mortgage. So what incentive does a medical student have when all of the bosses and the senior supervisors they talk about can barely put food on the table, who are struggling to decide when to have children in that lifestyle because moving remotely may be the only option for them for their career? But yet, why are they not let's talk about why they're not wanting to move remotely. Because out there it's dangerous, because patients die, because there's not enough medical support for them, because there's not enough nurses, because there's not enough funding in that environment, that I literally sat there and decided, do I go ACRM training and become a GP obstetrician, or do I become become an obstetrician in the city? I don't want to be out there where a woman dies on my watch, where I don't have the support and training to be there. So somehow we actually need to do a blanket change right now, where we go into medical schools and right at the beginning we actually put them into a bonded program, which you know exists, to be GPs already, not just necessarily doctors of any type of specialty, because all those other specialties, let's be honest, are very sexy financially. No, they are, guys. I'm just being really honest. A neurosurgeon, a cardiologist, an obstetrician, which is what I'm studying to be, they're really wonderful terms. And don't get me out, they're wonderful, but they're not sustainable long term, because all of a sudden we're not going to have the general GP, the family doctor, who actually diverts their patients to us if we don't have the right system in place right now. So I feel like we need to inject a huge amount of money right now into the next 5 years of pretty much saying, creating a medical school that is just general practitioners. In other words, you get in, that's your choice, that's your pathway. Make it a specialty that is so sexy in its own that all these people are then wanting to go out rural and wanting to go out remote.
Jana Pittman has called for GPs to be sexy again. I love it. It's true. As a GP addict,
you go regularly.
Hi to my doctor. Here she is again. But the health economics here, obviously the government's been trying to make some shifts, but this is going to need a broader overhaul, isn't it?
Well, certainly to tackle the kind of numbers question, I think, we've sort of looked at this, and when you look at a macro level, it's not clear that we actually have shortages of GPs and nurses overall. So we actually compare pretty favourably to a lot of developed countries in the numbers per 1,000. The key challenge, which both have pointed to, is the distribution. Yeah. So you go out to regional New South Wales or, northwest Melbourne. There's pockets of cities and pockets of regions where we...
Nepean and like Blue Mountains and Blackheath don't even have doctors at the moment.
Yeah,
There's one GP in Blackheath that's actually working. My parents live in Taree and they have one GP and they can't see them for 4 months.
Yeah,
if there's a critical health condition, that's crazy.
This is the problem. And this is why I think when we think about the policy solution, it's probably less of the blanket stuff and more of the kind of localised interventions. And Jana's point about kind of building the team around the GP is important. Just sending someone alone out to a regional community, does feel scary and does feel exposed. So we actually need governments doing this kind of place-based local interventions, helping set up the clinic, underwriting the salary of that doctor, building the team around them. If we're going to put money into it, I think that's what we need to do, and that's the only way we're going to deal with these kind of equity and access issues.
Yeah, I think you guys are the experts, so I'm not going to comment on the training, but regional and in my electorate's about an hour and a half out of out of the CBD of Melbourne, and has trouble attracting doctors and GPs. So I agree with the significance. And I think the question in the short term is what other opportunities are there? I know pharmacists are talking about, can they take some of the pressure off GPs? Yep. And I think that's, again, something we should look at, immunisation and a few other things. One of the other things that we don't talk about a lot is the technological opportunities. And I had the amazing opportunity here from an AI company, Harrison AI, that are using AI to triage radiology scans, CAT scans and X-rays and things, highlight the main risks that would be there. And then the trained professional is reviewing that. But what it means is they've got 8 hours in a day. They're focused on the most important, most urgent scans, and they look at the whole scan, but they know roughly where to look. So how do we use technology and med tech, and how can we speed up the process around med tech while making sure it's safe, recognising that a delay of 6 to 12 months to unlock a med tech opportunity is actually an economic opportunity cost and a medical opportunity cost right now, and how can we be smarter as well as get training and support GPs? Telehealth as well.
Yeah, well, Tamworth Hospital's doing that now. So their ED department actually runs, instead of waiting 4 or 5 hours to see a doctor, they triage their patients and then they have an online option. So they are trying to look at ways to expand that.
Telehealth, we're in this new digital world. How can we take some pressure off and not just focus on how much we spend, but the outcomes that we're delivering? Because ultimately that's what the health system should be delivering, outcomes for patients and the community.
Jessie, I know you had a baby 2 months ago and you're here.
Yes.
So, wow. Yeah. I was broken on the couch after my first child. And, the baby was raising me already, as she still does. I know you recently actually had a hospital experience.
Yes, I did.
And what happened there?
It was the funniest hospital experience. So I was had my baby, and then about 6 weeks later, I had a complication with stitches. I won't go into it. We'll talk backstage.
Okay.
So I had an issue with stitches, and I ended up in emergency, and I was laying there, and I had a sort of gyno come in, and I went, I know your face. Have I interviewed you for work? What is it? And I was sitting there going, don't know. I'd had some painkillers. I had no idea. Anyway, she treated me, examination, internal, external, whole thing. And then I went home later and I went, that was Jana Pittman. Oh, no. That was Jana Pittman, the Olympian. And then I got an email. I got an email the next day from my publicist saying, Q&A, because after that I was like, when am I going to see Jana again? Am I going to And then she was like, Q&A is coming up. We've got one panellist in, and it's Jana Pittman. And I was like, no. So because of the shortage, I might have a chat backstage. We might follow up and just see how it's all going.
Just a little check-up.
Just a check-up.
See how things are going.
I'm always on call, yeah.
Does that happen to you all the time where people are like, hang on a minute, are you that woman from the Olympics?
With their legs like this and I'm in their vagina. It's great.
And you're like...
You don't want to recognise your gyno. You don't.
That's bad for my future career.
Anyway, she was a wonderful doctor with an excellent
10 out of 10. So I'm here today, aren't I? So thank you for your help, and I wish I never saw you again.
Also, how small is this country exactly?
Like, what are the chances? I hadn't come across Yana. I was like, the SAS, I'd seen her around, but I didn't think I would ever sit on a panel trying to act smart in front of the person who was treating me 2 weeks ago.
And this is why we love bringing a broad range of people together, from gynecology to the Q&A set. Now, let's hear from Mark Werman.
Thanks, Patricia. My question is to Jessie Stevens. In your book, Something Bad is Going to Happen, you describe the pressures that young women bear today through unrealistic society expectations, anxiety and rejection. Given that these issues continue to blight women today, do you think that things will ever improve?
Great question. That was definitely one of the reasons I wanted to write that book, because it was informed by Sylvia Plath's book, The Bell Jar, was written 60 years ago. And this is in conversation with that, because I thought that's about a woman who has what was then referred to as sort of a nervous breakdown. And we know that the mental health of millennial women in Australia, it's among the worst. They're the most highly medicated. Loneliness is an enormous issue. And while our material circumstances in some ways seem to be getting better, we're not happier. So that seems like a big issue to me. And so it's a question about how to improve it, but I think progress isn't always linear, and it's about feminism as well, because feminism has afforded women so many incredible things, but with each generation comes new problems. And so even things like, it's cliche to even say, but social media and phone addiction and dating. I mean, I think about women and men today, and I don't think we were designed for this amount of rejection that we get from being on dating apps. My grandmother was not rejected this much by 30. That's something that is really affecting people. And so I wanted to look at that and see if there was a solution. And when you look at a demographic that's really sad, it tells us something about what it means to be happy. And that's what I tried to do in that book. But I'm definitely hopeful. And I think by talking about it and being more honest and pointing to those new problems, hopefully we can start solving them.
And we can bring you the result of our online poll now. We asked you, should women be paid superannuation as part of the government's paid parental leave scheme? More than 6,200 of you responded. Here's how you voted. 72% of you said yes. 18% said no, and about 10% said you were unsure. Now, to finish tonight's discussion, here's Marjo Hallowell.
Hi. I'm rather curious what they're going to do when and if they find Nessie. What are they going to do? People sort of spend lots of time looking for Nessie, and if they sort of say no, it doesn't exist, are they going to stop looking? So what are they going to do when they do find her? Or him?
Yeah.
That sounds like a great question for Danielle Wood. Should we be in... What is the economic proposition of spending... Actually, quite a good economic proposition.
It would be a massive boom for the local town, and I have noticed that the Tourism Authority seems very keen on the latest search, so that probably answers your question. But what I would like to do is just put her back in the wild. I mean, what a terrible life posing for selfies for the end of time. Let her go back to peace.
Yeah, poor Nessie. Just let her be. All these, Bigfoot Nessie, it's part of the mystique of life. Digital, these drones they're going to send up, and I'm a bit disappointed. I like the idea that whatever Nessie's doing, that's okay.
I like the unknown as well. Let her, he or her be in nature.
Do you believe in Nessie?
I like to believe in Nessie, but I like to believe in Santa as well. So,
Do you still believe in Santa too?
But the idea of the mystery of it, I think, is really exciting.
Look, I think Nestle needs to live their best life. And is that happening at the bottom of a lake? I don't know. But
Very cold lake, aren't you?
very cold, very dark.
cold. Very deep.
And dark.
Oh.
Sit there and watch the waves and you're pretty sure that you've seen her. You just sort of sit there and it's
the mystery and mystique.
very dark water and very wavy.
It's more fun if we never find her and just believe she exists.
I do.
I absolutely do. It's more fun. And I think it draws tourism because we're all looking and squinting.
And what would we do if we did find her, though?
That's the sad part.
Would we study her?
Yes,
Take a
of course.
photo? Put it on the
We would
internet?
put it on the internet.
We would ruin it.
I know Aaron
You
and
would
I would
ruin
be
it.
taking a selfie, I'm sure.
Now, before I go, there's a lot of talk about conflict and politics, but you two are kind of buddies, aren't you?
He's all right. No, so as a new MP, one of the biggest, I'm going to say shocks I found, because I wasn't really political prior to this, was some of the friends that I made across the aisle. And one of those people was Aaron. I met him on the first day when we had our little tour running around the corridors getting lost. Thank God the bells ring for 4 minutes, can I just say, because otherwise I'd get lost. But no, Aaron's one of the good ones, I reckon.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you know, it is. It's funny you get into Parliament and it's a unique environment. And yeah, Gordon and I just happened to be next to each other on day one and have always got on really well since. Had really good conversations. It's one of the good things about politics in my mind that, to use a sporting analogy, the House is a little bit about the field, and so we can disagree on issues, but that doesn't define who we are as people or the relationship that we have. So it is really nice to have someone on the other side you can talk to about different issues, and if you're having a good day or a bad day, you can share it with someone else. And I figured it was also good to be pretty close with the doctor in the house as well, just in case. You never know.
You never know when the Loch Ness Monster might come and attack you at Parliament House.
Absolutely.
And that's all we have time for. Thanks to our panel, Jessie Stevens, Gordon Reid, Jana Pittman, Aaron Violi and Danielle Wood. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions. Next week, I'll be with you live from Melbourne. Head to our website to register to be in our special Melbourne audience. Good night.